I'm easing my dusty pickup and horse trailer down the gravel road toward my family ranch, for months gone, lungs full of that dry evening air, when flashing red and blue cut straight through the sunset. 3 patrol cars lined up across my gate like a barricade in some low-budget crime drama. And there in the middle of it all is Karen 2.0. In my world, her name is Madeline Crowhust. Arms folded so tight her bracelets are clinking. That triumphant little smile bouncing on her lips like she's already spent the victory money she hasn't won yet. A deputy shuffles up, hat in hand, eyes saying he hates this, and tells me they've had a trespassing complaint, that according to the lady behind him I don't belong on this property, and I just look at him, then at the iron arch that stood over this entrance longer than his grandparents have been alive. Red Mesa Ranch, established 1889, then back at Madeline, who moved into the brand-new subdivision down the road about 3 months ago, and suddenly thinks she discovered this land, and I can't help it. I laugh, low and tired, and say, "Officer, let me introduce you to the woman who just called the cops on the guy who oversees every HOA in America." Her smile melts right there in the dust, and before I tell the deputy anything else, I drag you back with me 4 months, to the day I buried my father, Walter Ridgefield, on the same red soil his grandfather plowed with a mule. 2,300 acres of mesquite and pasture in Cedar Bluff County, a working ranch that's fed families for over a century, and a place I swore I'd protect even if the whole country turned into cul-de-sacs and cul-de-sacs turned into battlefields. While I was out here doctoring calves and fixing busted fence, I've been working my way up inside a federal agency with the kind of dry name that hides sharp teeth, the National Housing Oversight Agency, and 4 months ago, right after we laid Dad in the ground, they called me to Capitol Heights for a promotion, Regional Director for Community Association Oversight, the guy who makes sure HOAs follow the law instead of making it up as they go. The irony didn't hit me until later, because while I was in DC learning how to deal with crooked boards and shady developers, my foreman, Tommy Harlan, was back home dealing with a shiny new subdivision called Canyon Ridge Meadows, advertised as authentic frontier living, which turned out to mean people from the coasts paying big money to live next to cow pastures and then filing complaints that cows exist. And leading that charge was Madeline, 40-something, fresh off some HOA civil war in Seacliff Bluffs out west, who appointed herself Community Standards Chair before the moving truck even cooled. Tommy called me from his flip phone that never quite gets good reception, telling me how this woman drove past twice a day with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and the intensity of a building inspector at a condemned motel, how she photographed our herd through the fence and took notes on manure patterns like she was writing a dissertation on bovine digestion, how certified letters started stacking up on our porch faster than hay bales in harvest season, excessive agricultural odor, unsightly equipment, livestock noise, like she'd discovered that cows moo and tractors aren't decorative. By the time I got back from DC, 17 official complaints were waiting for me, and a reputation preceded her, courtesy of Harvey Nolan at the feed store and Elena Morales at the diner, both of them delighted to warn me about the new neighbor with the weaponized stationery. I met Madeline for the first time standing between salt blocks and horse mineral at Nolan Feed and Supply, her hand extended like she was welcoming me to a charity gala instead of my own town, manicured smile, teeth too white, voice too polished as she introduced herself as Community Standards Advocate for Canyon Ridge Meadows, and launched into a 20-minute monologue about modernizing my operation to better match their neighborhood aesthetic. I let her talk, boots crunching on spilled grain, pretending to compare mineral mixes while she explained how my cattle road might need to move, how early morning feeding might be reconsidered for social harmony, how tractors and old equipment disrupted property values, and the way she said solutions made it crystal clear she meant submission. That night, I rocked on the same porch my great-grandfather built, thunderheads building on the horizon and that metallic smell of coming rain in the air, reading a notice from the county about an upcoming compatibility hearing she'd triggered, a meeting where she wanted to drag a century-old ranch to the table and ask it to bow to a 3-month-old subdivision. I took a slow sip of bourbon, felt the storm rolling in, and smiled. She had no idea who she'd picked a fight with. Madeline didn't stay a solo act for long. Because bullies rarely do, they recruit an audience. Within weeks, she'd turned her irritation into a full-blown crusade, forming the Canyon Ridge Property Preservation Committee in her kitchen, flanked by Philip Crane, a retired bank manager who treats pennies like endangered species, and Linda Parrish, a former city councilor who fled bureaucracy only to recreate it in rural country. They showed up with matching folders, a mini projector, and a presentation titled Agricultural Impact Mitigation, as if our cattle were chemical waste. The funniest part? She tried to research me online, found my federal title, and completely misread it, deciding I must be some pro-ranch regulator protecting big agriculture. So her plan was to go over my head to Washington, not realizing I was the one Washington had just put in charge of people like her. While she fantasized about reporting me to my bosses, I was sitting in the downtown office of Claire Donovan, my attorney, watching her lay out deeds and easements like cards on a poker table. That's when we hit gold. Decades ago, my grandfather had made sure Red Mesa Ranch was wrapped in agricultural easements, permanent legal armor that says if you move next to a working farm, you don't get to complain that farming happens there. Every noise, every dust cloud, every sunrise feeding, all of it was protected activity, and every complaint Madeline filed was, in legal language, basically her documenting for us that we were still doing exactly what we'd always done. Then Claire dug into Madeline's past. 3 states. For communities, the same pattern. Legal threats, nuisance claims, weaponized HOA rules, and a former neighbor in Suncrest Hills who laughed so hard describing her that she had to catch her breath. This woman had tried to get a mariachi band arrested, called immigration on a gardener, filed noise complaints against a family that didn't even own a dog. It wasn't about cattle, it was about control. So while she hired a fancy firm from Riverstone City to send us letters dripping with nuisance abatement and diminished property values, while she measured manure piles and decibel levels at 6 a.m., while she launched a Facebook crusade called Rural Reform Now and posted glamour shots of cow pies like they were crime scene photos, we quietly built a file of our own. The county planning director, Robert Ellison, an old fishing buddy of my dad's, pulled the original development permits for Canyon Ridge Meadows and almost spit coffee across his desk laughing. The subdivision had been approved on one condition: a 200-foot agricultural buffer, sound barriers, and drainage work that the developer never actually finished before going bankrupt. Legally, those obligations transferred to the HOA, which meant Madeline's board now owned roughly $340,000 worth of unfulfilled promises to the county. Her own house, built about 50 feet from our fence line, was technically in violation of the original setback. At the same time, I was in federal training rooms learning that any neighborhood built with federal tax credits or housing incentives fell under our oversight. Canyon Ridge Meadows had those incentives stamped all over its paperwork, which meant the HOA's books, permits, and enforcement practices were all fair game for a federal review, and the woman trying to portray herself as a victim of big ranch corruption had walked herself straight into my jurisdiction. On the ground, things kept escalating in ways that would have been hilarious if they weren't so exhausting. Elena banned Madeline from her diner after she complained that chicken and dumplings smelled too ethnic. Harvey kicked her out of the feed store when she demanded to inspect our delivery trucks, like she was Border Patrol. Our vet, Dr. Megan Holt, prepared statements on our animal care because Madeline had started calling the state vet hotline about imaginary abuse. Then came the agencies. She filed with the Postal Service about our ranch road, the IRS about our taxes, the State Environmental Office about dust, tried to slip cash to one of our seasonal hands, Miguel Santos, asking if we were dumping chemicals in the creek. When Tommy called me, laughing, saying she thinks the only thing we dump out here is corruption, I felt this strange mix of anger and amusement, like watching someone build their own jail cell brick by brick. Meanwhile, my attorney was quietly putting together a harassment case. Security cameras Tommy installed showed Madeline standing on ladders to photograph our yard, tailing my truck through town, idling outside our gate for hours with binoculars, blocking supply trucks at the subdivision entrance like she was customs. Deputies warned her more than once that agricultural protection laws were real, that she was the one towing the line, but people like her think every warning is proof they're right. Local media sniffed it out next. A reporter from Channel 9 Action News, Logan Price, started digging, and the story shifted fast from Ranch Harris's subdivision to problem neighbor Target's century-old operation. He uncovered that the HOA had $120,000 plus in unaccounted administrative spending under the previous board and had skipped required annual reports. So while Madeline screamed about cow smell, the community she represented was quietly sliding toward financial and legal disaster. By the time our county scheduled that compatibility hearing, I had 3 fronts lined up like cavalry: Claire with easements and developer violations, Robert pushing a full permit compliance review, and my own office in D.C. preparing an HOA oversight file thick enough to stop a bullet. All Madeline had was a slideshow of cow photos, a decibel meter, and a community getting more nervous by the day. The night before that hearing, I sat on the porch again. The same sky, the same hills. Only this time, instead of wondering how to defend my land, I realized all I really had to do was stand still, tell the truth, and let her momentum carry her over the edge. The public part unraveled fast and loud. At the Canyon Ridge Clubhouse, Madeline dimmed the lights, rolled her PowerPoint, and tried to turn my family's ranch into a villain with ominous background music and red arrows pointing at cows like they were criminals. Then I stood up in the back, uninvited, but completely within my rights, and walked through every slide with calm voice and thicker documents, easements, permits, state law, one by one, until even her allies stared at their shoes. Her own decibel readings showed our morning feedings were quieter than a Saturday lawnmower. Her manure photos simply proved we owned livestock. Her dust measurements read like a weather report. Residents started asking her about underfunded reserves, missing reports, potential special assessments, and you could feel the room pivot as people realized the real threat to their property values wasn't the ranch that had always been there. It was the HOA that hadn't done its homework. County planning then dropped the hammer. A formal compliance order, 90 days to fix the buffer, drainage and sound barriers, or face legal action. The HOA board, suddenly staring down $12,500 per household, voted to strip Madeline of all leadership roles. Some families listed their homes that week. Their insurance carrier threatened to pull coverage for noncompliance. Her carefully crafted image of savior cracked just enough for everyone to see the panic underneath. Her behavior, though, didn't slow, it spiraled. She followed my truck, parked outside our gate with binoculars, filmed our kids' 4-H events from too far back to be casual. She launched anonymous social accounts posting rambling conspiracy theories about federal corruption and Big Ranch, so disjointed most people thought they were parody. When she blocked one of our feed deliveries on a county road, tried to inspect the hay, Deputy Cole Ramirez had seen enough. That's when Claire filed for a restraining order, and we walked into Judge Harold Benton's courtroom with a timeline that ran like a slow-motion car crash: letters, videos, radio rants, agency complaints, driveway blockages, all of it. The judge watched footage of her measuring our fences at dawn, of her SUV tailing mine, of her screaming at a 1,200-pound cow that wandered up to her survey rod, and finally said, with the exhaustion of 3 decades on the bench, that her behavior met every definition of sustained harassment and stalking. He granted a protective order pushing her 1,000 yards from our property and referred charges to the DA. The clip of her being served that order outside the courthouse, yelling that I was using federal power to destroy innocent homeowners, while deputies gently turned her away, ran side by side on the local news with a story about Red Mesa Ranch receiving a historical agricultural heritage designation. That contrast, her chaos, our continuity, did more than any speech I could have written. Meanwhile, my federal life and ranch life collided in the brightest spotlight possible. The House Subcommittee on Community and Housing Standards held a hearing in Austin, and I sat under the cold lights, nameplate reading Ethan Ridgefield, National Housing Oversight Agency, explaining exactly how a place like Canyon Ridge Meadows becomes a ticking time bomb when developers cut corners and HOAs don't understand what they inherit. I used our case as the example: the easements, the missing buffer, the drained reserves, the harassment, and the cameras carried it everywhere. While I talked about policy and rural protection, Madeline tried to attend, shouting accusations from the hallway until Capitol Security escorted her out, live on C-SPAN. Overnight, she stopped being concerned resident and became a meme: the woman who measured cow poop and called the cops on a 100-year-old ranch. What followed wasn't instant karma. It was slow, grinding consequence. The HOA finally completed the buffer and drainage work at a cost that crushed some families and scared others into selling at a loss. The new board passed anti-harassment policies and issued a written apology to our ranch. The county and my agency used Canyon Ridge as a textbook example in training for how not to handle rural-suburban tension. On our side of the fence, Red Mesa Ranch didn't just survive, it grew. The state granted us Century Farm recognition. We opened the gates selectively for school tours and heritage days. Elena's Diner filled with tourists ordering ranch breakfast. Local businesses reported double-digit growth from age-related traffic, and the scholarship fund we started with Claire and Robert now helps kids study agriculture and come back home, instead of leaving for good. Nationally, the reforms we pushed became the Neighborhood Accountability Act of 2025, requiring HOAs to disclose all development obligations to buyers, strengthening protections for adjacent farms, and giving oversight directors like me real tools to intervene when a board or a bully goes off the rails. Our case is now taught in planning programs and property management seminars as the Ridgefield precedent. Don't weaponize an HOA against the land that was there first, or you might take down your own community instead. As for Madeline Crowhost, the end of her story isn't glamorous, it's quiet and small. Facing criminal stalking charges, drowning in legal bills and old debts from her previous wars, she took a plea, accepted probation and mandatory counseling, watched her husband Mark file for divorce, saw her kids stop visiting out of pure embarrassment. Their house went into foreclosure. She left the state with no forwarding address, and her name now shows up in HOA training slides as what not to become. Years later, when I stand by the porch my great-grandfather built, watching my wife Claire check tomatoes in the garden and our kids racing each other between the corrals, hearing a tour bus pull up for an evening program and the sheriff's truck roll past with a friendly wave, the whole mess feels less like a feud and more like a parable. One woman's obsession nearly broke a neighborhood, but it also forced a county, a state, and eventually a country to ask who really gets to define community. The people who signed the HOA rules last year, or the families who have worked the land for generations. I got my closure. The ranch is protected by law and by story. The bully burned down her own pedestal, and the people who actually live here chose cooperation over control. So now I'll throw it to you. If someone like Madeline moved in next to you and tried to rewrite your life with complaint forms and threats, where's the line between standing your ground and going too far? What does real justice look like when rules collide with basic decency? And in a fight between paper power and rooted history, whose side should the law truly be on?